meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for September 24th. First item on our agenda is public comment. I have one speaker request card from Ralph Hoffman.
Good evening. Pardon me for having food in my mouth. I just got my flu shot today, and I would strongly urge that anyone who uses public transit, particularly BART, which has cars being repaired and is very crowded during rush hour back and forth, and also senior citizens and little children, if you have any kids or grandchildren, they are most at risk of getting flu. And of course, when you use public transit, you are quite close to people you don't know, and they may have the flu as well. That's about all I have for now. Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next item of business, the approval of the summary of actions.
Second.
You got a second? Have I heard it first? Oh, okay. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions?
One abstention.
One abstention. Two abstentions? All right.
Point of information, Mr. Chairman. Yes, my point is, I want the record indicate that I am here. I don't know if you made the roll call yet, but Diane, okay, thank you very much, sure.
Okay, we've passed to the review of the attendance log. Are there any changes listed for the attendance log? The meeting calendar. I do want to point out that we will have our meeting at the usual fourth Sunday in October, but then in keeping with the authorities' practice, we will combine the November-December meetings and have them on the 10th of December. So members should be aware of that. And finally, does anyone have any changes to their entry in the roster?
Stephen, will you speak into your
Oh,
microphone
okay.
a little better? It's hard to hear you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Any changes to the roster?
I just noticed we don't have so many members anymore.
We have had one resignation after the last meeting that I know of, and I believe we also have a opening for the representative from Contra Costa County. Okay, we'll pass on to then the regular agenda items. First being the review of the Town of Moraga's calendar year 2012 and 2013 Growth Management Program Compliance Checklist. Do we have a representative of Town Moraga here?
Stuck in traffic.
Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, the town of Moraga's planning director has left the town, and so we don't have a representative tonight.
All right.
It's Richmond, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have a Moraga representative here. Is there any general discussion on the checklist?
Well, I think Moraga just came before us within the last 6 months or so for the previous checklist, so I'm sure that there's not been a whole bunch of changes, and I don't think we had any issues outstanding on it. So I have no problems with nobody being here from Moraga. I would have liked to have known, because it's always a good opportunity whenever these jurisdictions come before us to sort of get some lay of the land as far as their city goes, and perhaps somebody knows. I know that Moraga had a very ambitious city center project, which I'm not really sure what the progress on that. And that's the only question I had. So I don't know if anybody locally has any thoughts on how Moraga is doing on that project. I guess not.
I always like to see what they've listed as the appendices to be included in our checklist. And there's one I can't find. Maybe someone knows where it is. Ordinance number 170, Transportation Demand Management. Has anybody found that?
Did you go online and look at the attachments
Online?
online?
No, I checked. I read paper.
Oh, okay. Let me turn that on, just so I can tell the whole world. We don't get all of the information. Much of it was also online, which I happened to look up because I was interested in some things. At the top, it says full packet with attachments available at www.ccta.net on our yellow sheet. And that's where I looked it up. I didn't look for the ordinance, so I can honestly say I don't know about the ordinance. But I was looking at the attachments of various different improvements that they're proposing. One of which is a roundabout on Ream and St. Mary's, which I was going to ask about. But so it might be in there if you go online, if you can.
Yes, so.
Okay.
Any further discussion on the town of Moraga's checklist?
I had a few questions with the housing element implementation. There was that they're still ongoing as to access for affordable housing subsidies. I wanted to know more about that. And reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. And what were their equal housing opportunities? I also had a question about, they made comment to the fact that they are coordinating with St. Mary's College, but they didn't say what they're coordinating about. Do you know, Linda?
The only thing I know for a fact, because I looked it up, was the roundabout for St. Mary, at Ream and St. Mary's. And St. Mary's College is supposed to put in their proportionate share of improving that.
Where is that roundabout going to be?
Ream
Yeah.
and St. Mary's is what it said. There's a four-way stop
Right.
right now.
Right.
It sounded to me like they were planning on taking the stoplights out. I don't know for a fact, but the whole purpose was to slow down traffic and give the pedestrians and bicyclists a better right-of-way. Was the purpose behind it, and that was the only thing I saw about St. Mary's contributing to anything. I could have missed something, but that was it.
And does anybody know, thank you, and does anybody know what this is, revise the definition of family? Is that, why would that even be on this?
We haven't settled that yet, how to define a family. I suppose it's the number of persons who live together, whether they're married or not.
That's what I was wondering. or
Something like
An
that.
extended family. I did notice in the beginning there that when this was adopted in June, neither the mayor nor the vice mayor were present. They were both absent. It was interesting to note.
There's been kind of a schism with the Moraga Town Council the past year or so. Ooh, sorry, Russell's in here this evening.
Yeah, Mark, what's going on?
Jill, I'm kind of surprised you haven't heard about this, but there was really kind of a bipolar feeling among, it's a 3-2 situation with the Moraga Town Council right now, which is why they didn't have any meetings, for example, during the summer. So it's kind of a challenging situation in terms of town governance right now. That's what I've heard from several folks in the Lafayette and Orinda councils. So.
I would presume they have at least 2 seats up for election or re-election. Well, maybe we'll see some kind of resolution.
Mr. Chair, I really see no reason not to recommend acceptance of Moraga's checklist, but I also find it interesting, that there are questions amongst our members for Moraga, which I feel should be resolved. I was wondering if, since Yolanda seems to have a lot of the questions, as does Russell's here too, but even so for the for the city, if maybe we through Martin would ask these questions so that the Moraga would get back to us. So I think that maybe we should delegate Yolanda to maybe put the questions together, since you seem to have the bulk of them.
Well, we now have the committee member from Moraga
Yay.
present.
Well, he
Yay.
may not necessarily know the the official responses.
Hey, I'll do what I can. It's been a little while since I've been involved with the planning efforts over there, so I'm no longer on the planning commission or anything, but I'll try.
We'll be nice, Russell, not to worry.
All right, so fire away.
So, may I? I was just making a few comments, and I had a few questions, and my initial comment was noting that the mayor and the vice mayor were absent for the June meeting when this was approved. I just found that interesting, and so I thought I'd comment on that.
Fair enough. I don't know anything about that.
Also, I had a couple of questions on the program implementation status, Table C. You're revising the condominium conversion ordinance, but it's incomplete and it's pending. And so the town of Moraga is looking to convert apartments to condominiums?
I'm not aware of that being a big policy front. I mean, I see it in here. I think they're starting last year, the year before, there was a significant effort to revamp the zoning ordinances in Moraga because they'd sort of been cobbled together over a long, long period of time, and they weren't even necessarily internally consistent. And I'm also under the impression that we lost our planning director again, if I'm not mistaken. So she was spearheading that whole effort, and I'm just not sure. Frankly, the bigger issue a year ago was secondary units rather than condo conversions. So I really don't know what's going on with condo conversions, but we were going to have a new secondary unit ordinance.
So the secondary unit says to the illegal what's it, like in-law units? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
reviewing that to bring them up to code and have them,
The situation there is that the ordinance is currently written as so restrictive that nobody actually goes through the planning process, and so anyone who's ever done an in-law unit has done it illegally. And so there's a lot of talk about amnesty programs for some loosening of the ordinance requirements to actually allow units to be built. And Orinda, which is right next door, has a very well-functioning in-law unit ordinance, whereas Moraga does not. So they build legal units with some regularity, and it provides affordable housing in that city. So that was the model we were talking about, and I just don't know where the effort is.
yeah, it made comment to that and the fact that it was addressed in December of 2011 and looks like it's still pending. Do you know what the definition of family is? There are people that's under your housing element implementation. You're looking at, instead of the traditional mom and dad type of thing, extended families. Is that what the town is looking at?
I don't know.
I was just curious why they even put that in there.
Is that also in Table C?
It's, yeah, it's an extension. It's attachment 1, page 6 of 7.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that one refers to.
I was just curious as to why you even
Yeah.
put that in there. And what is it that the town of Moraga is coordinating with St. Mary's? There was no definition.
As a land use issue, St. Mary's has been going through a lot of construction of late, and so the town tries to stay coordinated with them across a whole host of issues. They haven't been really building more housing, though. It's been athletic facilities and the like, and so we've been dealing with traffic impacts during construction and some changing traffic patterns. They'd extended or expanded several of their sports facilities. So I think they're getting bigger crowds now for sporting events and that sort of thing. So I also believe they're in the process of putting together some kind of master plan for the campus, and so that it may refer to that as well. It's just making sure our planning department and the St. Mary's folks are doing that in lockstep.
There was a mention of a possibility of a roundabout in that area?
Yeah, I think in the front of the St. Mary's campus, the intersection of Ream Boulevard as it meets St. Mary's Road just to the, whatever that is, northeast of the campus entrance is a fairly dangerous intersection because of sight lines and the way it backs up. So I had heard some discussion of a roundabout. But again, I don't know where that is in the process right now.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Russell, I'm just
Yes.
wondering, maybe to do with the housing definition, do the college kids ever live off campus?
I think many of them do. Most of them do, or a large percentage of them do, yes.
So unrelated kids could be trying to occupy the same housing unit, and maybe they want to come to some definition about that.
Yeah, that's a reasonable guess. I know in the preparation of the specific plan for the downtown Moraga or the Moraga Shopping Center, Moraga Town Center, I think they call it. There was a lot of discussion in the context of affordable housing, of student housing and elderly housing, and I do not believe they got any real interest and participation from St. Mary's on the student housing front, and so the focus ended up being a lot of sort of elderly housing and that sort of thing. There is currently going through the planning process a high-density development in the specific plan area that has generated a great deal of controversy, not unexpectedly, I suppose, even though it's totally consistent with the specific plan that was adopted over a year ago. So that's winding its way through the process as well.
Housing element mentions a new zoning ordinance for, what, 20?
Yeah, that was a requirement of having the element was approved by the state. If you upzone, it allows an approval as opposed to having prescriptive affordable requirements and that sort of thing. So that's the path that the
And it's been adopted, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
But nothing's been constructed yet, just,
No, this would be the first of them, this project that's winding its way through. And I believe the Planning Commission approved it just last month, and it's being appealed to the town council this month. I mean, it's hot and heavy. I don't attend the meetings, but I assume it would go through just because it's consistent with the specific plan and the zoning that was adopted.
Russell, when you speak of affordable housing, are you looking at seniors and students? Is that your target audience?
That was the initial discussion. I think it's mostly going to be senior-focused at this point, if I had to guess. So the first development coming through is not an affordable development. It's just a high-density development, is my understanding.
Where is that going to be?
Across Moraga Way from the shopping center, sort of near the firehouse on Moraga
Oh,
Way.
okay.
There are a bunch of story poles up there now, in fact, in some vacant land.
Russell, Mark had brought up his observation from across the city lines that Moraga might be having some controversial issues as far as the town council goes. Would that be an accurate statement to say that there are different schools of thought as far as what Moraga should be in the future? I'm putting that very delicately.
Yes, better stated than I would, I think. Yeah, that's, it's been an ongoing tension in the community, and I think it continues to this day. Again, I'm not real close to the day-to-day council politics, but there's a pretty strong, no growth and pro-growth kind of camps that end up happening in town, so.
Okay, I won't go for details because this is for polite company here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Russell, I don't want to put you on the spot, so.
Keep putting me on the spot. I can only say I don't know.
No, but this resistance to no growth, is that input not only from citizens of Moraga, but also from Orinda and Lafayette?
Well, certainly from, every time, at least in my experience on the Planning Commission, that we'd be looking at a significant development, that relationship with the neighboring communities was always a huge component of that discussion, particularly when you're talking about environmental impacts and the traffic studies and those sorts of things that we're doing. So, often the planning directors of the neighboring cities are pretty clear about their concerns moving forward. The biggest development, which hasn't broken ground, which is at the top of Moraga Road, just on the border of Lafayette, Moraga, that was heavily litigated for years. And in fact, I had the pleasure of having to review and approve the conceptual development plan for that while I was on the commission. And it was laid out to us what was in the legal settlement. So, there wasn't a lot of flexibility for the parties involved at that point in time about what was going in. And so it was mostly around, arraying those developments so they complied with the legal settlements that were arrived at. So sightlines, a lot of it was about sightlines from the Lafayette BART station and that sort of thing. But, the overall, I think, context, as I understand it, for a lot of those interjurisdictional issues was the adoption of Moraga's general plan, which of course had an environmental impact report associated with it. And so there were traffic studies done relative to a certain presumed level of growth of new household formation and new construction happening up in Moraga and how that would impact traffic in particular and some of the other things. And the actual build-out in Moraga, which is probably very clear in whatever table is usually in here, has been far below whatever was contemplated, in the general plan. And so, we still have some very understandable back and forth on the individual projects, but in terms of getting anywhere near that growth curve that was contemplated in the general plan, it's not even in the same ballpark. So there hasn't, in the end, been that much going on in Moraga.
What is the size of this development that's so large?
It includes in-law units. I think it was just north of 200 units, mostly single-family homes.
I was looking on the housing needs chart here, and you're behind 298 units.
That does not surprise me. does not.
But that, a couple of large projects could,
Yeah, and so I think the thinking, and if I'm even going to get the name of it wrong, Palos Colorados, I think, is the name of the large development. It was going to have 90-something in-law units. And there can be a healthy debate about whether they're really affordable housing, too, depending on whether, you have an in-law unit above a garage on a 7,500 square foot home, who's going to be occupying that space, really? And is it affordable and all that kind of stuff? But that was sort of seen, at least at the time, this goes back a couple of years ago during that approval cycle, that probably the primary opportunity outside of the Moraga specific plan area to get affordable units built. So I think they're looking for, partnerships. They continue to explore partnerships with developers to do some senior housing, assisted living projects in the Moraga specific plan area. And that would add to the total, too, if they can pull that together.
And I think that's important to emphasize that the Moragas was really relying on the town center specific plan to provide a lot of the affordable housing that their allocation is. And and to make your comment, to kind of expand your comment, it's just that I just don't see any housing being built in any jurisdictions. The last recession has really curtailed housing, and even though we see housing values going up, I personally am not aware of any major construction going on anywhere in our county. Maybe someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but there just seems to be a real backlog on providing housing, and I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work itself out, especially without the without redevelopment agencies, where cities could actually finance affordable housing. And I think this is going to be, I say this is about every meeting. I think this is going to be a real issue as we go forward. And it's not one that we're going to be able to resolve. It's not one the authority's going to be able to resolve. It's got to be resolved on the state level, and I'm not really sure what's going on there. So
and I also thought I'd just add, relative to the specific plan area, one of the other challenges that Moraga faces, it's an opportunity as well, is that somewhere upwards of 80% of the land in that area is owned by one landowner. So, it just becomes a very different kind of implementation process than another downtown or specific plan would be otherwise. If done right, it could happen presumably much faster because there's one party, but they also don't have a reputation for really building stuff either. So I personally don't know how long that's all going to take. But
as it's already been pointed out, it's very easy to read the reports on the housing elements there or what's been done, because it gets to be zeros until you read the last page, and the last page just has the assessment. But what caught my eye, along with something what she was mentioning, was ridge lines and whatnot. I'd be interested to hear your comments about that.
Well, that's where push comes to shove on most of the development issues in town. So the no growth sort of movement really found its footing years ago when they passed a ridgeline ordinance to prevent development from a certain, and it's actually based on altitude, so you can draw these circles along the ridge lines based on topo maps that are off limits. And so the back and forth really has been about whether or not through another initiative or some other means the sort of there's enough will in the community to drop that elevation down, ever further. So we have a lot of debates in town about major ridge lines and minor ridge lines, and is the building pad at 800 feet or 720, and all that kind of stuff. It really becomes crucial, but that's been the major tool in terms of development control. Along with we have a pretty aggressive hillside ordinance, which is understandable. There are a lot of steep hills, and the earth moves a lot up the hill there in Moraga. So I think it's wise to be cautious there as well. So
We had a struggle in Richmond, which will probably come back again. But yeah, the same thing. You want infill, absolutely, and you want to protect the views, but you also don't want people building on stuff that will slide given the chance.
yeah, we reviewed, again, not to digress too much, we reviewed a really amazing plan for a house that was on the most insane slope, and it was sort of infill between other properties. And everyone was very, very uncomfortable just about the whole idea of it. He was going to use water tanks as ballast, or I mean, it was just nuts. But it was a very interesting design, just the same. So yeah, we've seen some weird ones in town too.
Yep. The comment about the Ridgeline ordinance, is that local to Moraga, or is that the broader?
It's a Moraga ordinance. Yes.
Oh, okay. Do any other entities have that same type of ordinance?
Well, I think that various jurisdictions have open space initiatives. I'm not.
Yeah, no, open space, but more or less the Ridgeline.
Yeah, I don't know how many folks define it in the same way. It's a good question. I honestly don't know, but that's how we do it in Moraga. It's based on elevation.
Because I know for Concord, for the reuse plan, they said nothing on the hills, but Sino owns the top of the hill from Pittsburgh, not Concord. Concord doesn't get to the top of those hills.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if I could add, when the county developed the urban limit line ordinance for the county, one of the criteria in developing urban limit line had to do with slopes and other criteria like that. So as a default, every jurisdiction which accepted the county's urban limit line has has essentially a hillside ordinance built into it. It's not specifically a hillside ordinance, but it's kind of by the power of the urban limit line does have that in that. Yeah, I mean, each jurisdiction would have to develop its own urban limit line, but I'm just saying there's kind of like a default hillside ordinance built into the urban limit line.
Are there any further questions or comments, or if there are no further questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion for Russell Driver to be the mayor of Moraga.
Jeez. I respectfully decline.
Yes. Actually, the current mayor, Ken, is not a really bad guy. Ken Chu is a good guy. So
Yeah, he absolutely
No,
is.
he is.
He's great. We have
I
some
know him.
good council people for sure.
Well, I move we approve. Did you do that too?
Normally,
Oh, yeah, I'm in the wrong seat. It didn't even occur to me. Right then. So, thank you, Dave. So I move that the committee recommends to the full authority recommends that we approve Moraga's growth compliance or measure, J, compliance checklist for calendar years 2012 and 2013.
I'll second it.
second by Sally. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Before we move on to that, I just want to we probably should make sure that everybody who had questions about the checklist got those resolved by Russell there, whether we may have a need to actually direct questions to the town of Moraga. So is everybody satisfied? Yes. Okay.
And certainly, if you want me to help get written responses, I'm happy to sort of relay the questions if they're already in writing and follow, make sure they get back to you, because I'm surprised that there's no one from the town here tonight, and disappointed, I must say.
Mr. Chair, I'm satisfied. Nonetheless, Russell, I think it would be incumbent upon, not sure you, but one of the officials, I'm saying you don't have a planning, but maybe the mayor and assistant mayor, to appear before this committee in sometime in the near future. I think it's just customary to do so, and just the right thing to do. Although we've passed this, but nonetheless, I think it's just in keeping it with the good civility and honor and mannerism. And I know Ken. I know Ken is a fine gentleman, the mayor there, but nonetheless, I think someone should, I'm glad you're here, but I still think someone operating in that capacity should be here at some time, or submit a letter or some documentation of acknowledgement, or may perhaps even apology. Just a suggestion, that's all.
Also, when did Shauna leave their position?
You know, I'm not exactly sure. I just picked up on it on an agenda like last month. I mean, I really haven't been dialed in like I used to be. So I suspect that they are going through another round of staffing challenges there. But still, no excuse. They got the checklist in. Someone could have shown, I suppose. Or they could have, you know, prepped me and asked me to do it. So, but no one did.
Okay, well, then we will move on to second major discussion item, review of progress to date on the outreach effort for the draft 2014 Countywide Transportation Plan update.
Good evening, committee members. I promise to make this fairly quick. As you may recall, or hopefully have heard by now, we've started our 2014 Countywide Transportation Plan update process. And I know Martin has been working very hard and been before you for many months with information about that. And the last time I was before you, we were just getting ready to launch the public outreach effort. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on what we've done and what we've heard to date. So let's just get started. You may recall back in February and March, we brought in our consultant who had done the polling to give you a presentation about what we had heard via a telephone poll and focus groups. And these were some of the top items. And for those of you who can't read it, people said traffic smoothing on major roads, pothole repair, BART highways, better use of technology, buses, sidewalks and crosswalks, and bike lanes and paths were kind of some of the top transportation priorities that came out of that telephone poll. In August, we started our CTP Countywide Transportation Plan. We say it so often around here, I'll probably start using the acronym CTP. So if you hear me say that, that's what I'm referring to in this presentation. So in August, we started an outreach effort that was approved by the authority board, and we provided each of you and the board members a kind of a stakeholder toolkit that had newsletter content. You can use kind of some scripts, some frequently asked questions in case you were approached in the community. And if any of you lost that in your email, I'm happy to send it to you again. We launched an online public engagement and survey tool. I won't go through everything, public workshops, telephone town halls. It was a large effort for the authority. It's one of the largest we've undertaken in a few years. One of the major elements was public workshops, and we just completed all the in-person public workshops. I mean, approximately 130 attendees at those 5 workshops. Overall, the tone was very positive, and the suggestions were very wide-ranging, really depending on what part of the county we were in. People in Central County, quite a few of them commute by BART. That was a big concern for them. Quite a few folks are bicycle advocates, and bike lanes and bike safety was really important to them. In East County, they're still looking for better transit service. So there's really a wide variety of comments. And we had, it's kind of my picture I took on my phone, so it's probably a little hard to see. But at a lot of the workshops, we had kind of big boards with some of the projects that were in the action plans for each area of the county. And we allowed people to kind of write their good ideas on it. So you can see this is East County, and some of the things they wrote on there had to do with connecting bicycle paths. So they had a lot of paths that just kind of ended in the middle of nowhere, and support for the TriLink project and development of Byron Airport. We also hosted last night a telephone town hall, which was the first time we have undertaken something of this sort. And we had about a little over 4,000 people on the call for a period of time. So that was really amazing. Hopefully some of you were able to join us. And if you weren't, we will be getting a recording that we can post on our website. So you'll be able to see that as well. And you can just see we had, there's an option where people could ask a question. We had more than 150 people And I was sitting at my desk trying to screen some of those calls, and I can tell you it felt like being a telemarketer. It was very fast and furious. Once the call started, there were a lot of phone calls taken in 40 minutes. And we did 2 polls on the phone call where people could kind of express their support for different items. So one of the questions we asked was whether BART should be a priority, and 89% of the folks on the call thought that should be a priority. And we also talked a little bit about including funding for technology in the plan and kind of how to move our county forward. And 78% of the people on the call thought that that should be something we include in the plan. So those were just a few of the questions we got to ask. As I said, it was our first time, and we didn't want to overwhelm people, but I think this may be a tool you see in the future. We also, as I unveiled to you last time, have an online survey and engagement tool. And I know there's a lot of text on here, but to date, we've had about 2,700 visitors to the site. More than 350 people created an account, and we've gotten over 280 bright ideas submitted so far, with people letting us know what they like. And people also had the ability to kind of vote for their top 3 transportation priorities. And this is kind of the breakdown of how they're breaking out just on the online tool. BART, bicycles, buses, pedestrian improvements, local streets, highways, ferries, programs for seniors and those with disabilities, safe routes to school, and then carpool and rideshare. We also have other methods of comment, because of course not everybody can attend a public workshop, wants to spend an hour on the phone, or wants to create an account online. So we also have paper copies of the survey that we're giving out and we're sharing with folks, and they can distribute. So we've gotten 107 surveys returned so far, and we've gotten 54 comments directly emailed to us. And I put more than 25 phone calls, but I think Diane herself has probably gotten more than 25 phone calls. They're coming in so quickly, the number on my voicemail just keeps adding up, and we haven't even gotten through all of them. So all in all, we've gotten a really good response, and we've gotten a lot of really thoughtful, well-informed comments from the public. And so this is my pitch to you that it's not too late. We're still listening. That's the back row of the Hercules public meeting earlier this week with our executive director and some of our staff listening to the comments. And you can see Martin and I greeting everybody by the door. And what has been decided, we were originally going to end the comment period September 30th, but now we are extending the comment period on the CTP and also the draft, correct me if I say this wrong, supplemental environmental impact report. Got it? I'm learning planning. Okay. So we will be accepting comments through November 3rd, which gives us a whole nother month. So this is my pitch to you. If you want to still, help us get word out about this, I'm happy to provide any of you with paper copies of the survey. You can take to meetings, you can bring to groups, you can give to your city councils. We're happy to do a presentation about it for anyone who wants more information. So that's my brief update. And I know you guys meet again in October, but I probably won't come back until your December meeting with an update, because by then we should have all of the comments. And I really think it would be great to give you an overview of kind of how everything fits in. Mm-hmm.
So I was on the call last night, and you talked about a karma, which I had not heard about. Can you give us a little information, and is it only in the trial stages, and is it available to everyone that carpools to San Francisco?
Karma is and Martin, feel free to jump in. So Karma is a pilot program that Contra Costa Karma is an app for your phone. So you download it. The company that creates the app is actually called Avego. And CCTA entered into a pilot program with them a few years ago with Marin County and Sonoma County. And the goal was really to encourage carpooling. And what the app does is it matches drivers and riders in real time. So you can get on your phone and say, I'm making this trip. Is anyone looking for a ride, or is anyone driving that way? And folks can connect and carpool together. Unlike some of the other car sharing services like Uber or Lyft that you may have heard from, Karma is not for, it's not drivers for hire. the driver gets reimbursed kind of less than the IRS regular rate for driving. So it's not really a high profit business. And so for us, this has really been an experiment in seeing what gets people to change their behavior, what encourages people to carpool. If we make it as easy as possible, all you have to do is open your phone and see if anyone's going your way. Is that going to change your behavior travel? So we've started, the original test was here at Contra Costa Center. We did another test at Bishop Branch, and I believe now Karma on their own, not necessarily in conjunction with CCTA, just recently, I think yesterday, launched a toll rebate program on the Bay Bridge. That's probably what you heard of. It's open to anyone in the 9-county Bay Area. You don't have to live in Contra Costa. And what they are doing out of their own pocket is they are rebating the $2.50 toll for carpoolers across the bridge for anybody who goes across the bridge, which is in a carpool, 3 folks or more, if all of them are using the Karma application.
So that doesn't include the casual carpool?
If all 3 of those folks in the casual carpool download the Karma app and log into it, then that driver will get the toll rebate. Yes. It's only for the Bay Bridge right now. I did hear that kind of depending on the success of that, they may roll it out to some of the other bridges.
I've used Karma, and it works. I used it last year for about 6 months, and I had regular rider all the time, and I got reimbursed. I didn't know it was a pilot program. It looked like something kind of cool, and I still have the app on my phone. I haven't used it in a long time, but it's there. And there are people out there that are actually using it.
I would like to commend the CCTA for setting meeting in Hercules. As a Hercules resident, I learned especially very important about BART. And I think, like other people, that BART is number 1 in transportation in this congested area. And in plan, I found on the meeting that they plan extend BART to Hercules. They call them W-BART. Thank you. W-BART.
So, great presentation, thank you. I have a few questions. When you said that 89% of the people who responded said that BART was a priority for what?
I believe the question was phrased something along the lines of, in an earlier poll, BART was one of the top transportation priorities as indicated by residents. Do you agree that BART is a top transportation priority in Contra Costa? And they had the option to choose yes or no. So 89% of the folks said yes.
So that would be commuting to work and also recreational?
We didn't drill down.
Okay.
We left it very open-ended.
Okay. It was interesting to see that BART was number 1 in your telephone poll of priorities, and bicyclists were number 2. So is that, did you again not dig down to see is that bicyclists using bicycles in the area or using their bicycles to get on BART to get to further places?
On the online poll, again, we had 10 options, and we just asked people choose your top 3. So we didn't necessarily ask people what they were using BART for, whether they were traveling with a bicycle or not. I know at quite a few of the public workshops, folks discussed those two as kind of very separate things. Bicycles, their concern was about continuous bike lanes and safely being able to ride their bikes, and some concerns about folks not necessarily watching for bicyclists. And then the BART concerns was about, parking and access, and that trains are very crowded. Those are sort of kind of the anecdotal, some of the comments that we've heard.
Thank you. And then the last question is, when the question was asked as far as expanding BART, did they comment, it was that looking at eBART and going out to Antioch, or did they just say in Contra Costa County expand BART?
I don't think we had any questions that were specific to expansion of BART. I think a lot of the comments about BART that we've heard kind of both online and in the workshops were very specific to whatever area we were in. So in East County, quite a few folks were very focused on where the BART extension was scheduled to go in Antioch, whether there would be intermediate stops, and if there were any plans to continue it on to Brentwood. In Hercules and West County, folks were very interested in some sort of extension to BART north of Richmond. And then, in Central County, I think a lot of the comments had to do with capacity. People had a lot of trouble finding parking after certain times. Trains were very crowded, that sort of thing. So it was very, each region had kind of its own concerns about BART.
Okay, thank you.
When you were doing this, were you able to collect any demographic data?
Yes.
And?
Not all of it has been number crunched yet, to be very honest with you. We have been really overwhelmed with the response in a good way. We're very happy to have this kind of response. So our first priority has been trying to acknowledge the comments that have come in. And then our second priority will be to kind of crunch the numbers. So I can tell you that for the online tool, the type of information that we've been collecting is gender and zip code. For the telephone town halls, fairly similar for that. And for the public workshops, most folks who signed in, provided a name and an address that could give us similar information.
Are you going to map that out and graph it, map it, or do whatever and make something available?
I'm not sure yet, in all honesty, what we're going to do with the demographic portion. At this point, we've really been focused on the comments and kind of what is important to folks and what is really kind of rising to the top as a collective issue countywide.
In the demographics, are you collecting age ranges?
Not for everything. We haven't specifically asked people for their age.
I'll be interested to know, does your telephone survey respondents correspond or collaborates with the same type of response you get at the workshops? For example, because sometimes if you tend to lead the questions off what happened with a previous study, for example, BART, then there becomes an opportunity for perceived subjective biases, just from a pure methodology standpoint. So I would be interested to see, basically, does the same type of response, is it supported in the workshops or face-to-face interviews?
And I think that that's part of why we've been asking people to kind of select their top 3 transportation priorities on the paper surveys and on the online survey. And which is why we've kept them very general. That was in part for our own curiosity to see whether what we heard in the focus groups and the town halls is kind of aligning with the organic priorities of these folks who may not have been part of the telephone survey. Some items are similar. The public workshops, and actually they are all airing on CCTV. I think CCTV taped 3 of them, including the one at Hercules earlier this week. So hopefully you'll be able to catch it and see one. A lot of the comments in the public workshops are very specific to neighborhoods and cities, and it's very focused on that particular area, I think, because people turn out. They're interested in what's going to improve their own community, and they're not necessarily as global as some of the other items that we've heard in other forums.
All right, thank you.
Heard a buzzword right at the beginning, traffic smoothing. I'm interested to know what detail, if any. And the other thing, just a brief comment about bicycles and BART. I've seen you know, of course it's anecdotal, but in commute hours anyway, a huge increase. And I've even been a little bit surprised at how cooperative people have been. The people who are knuckleheads are still knuckleheads, but most people seem to be really, really cooperative.
Traffic smoothing, I'm not exactly sure who coined that term. It may have been the folks who did the polling for us. And it's really interesting because I think the way that came about was a lot of people were just expressing interest in having traffic kind of move at a steady rate, to not have the stop and go on city streets and on the highway, but just to kind of have a smooth, predictable ride wherever they were going and be able to predict the timing of that. And I think since that phrase was coined and kind of came out of that telephone poll, I've noticed that folks on our staff, including myself, have started to use it a lot just because it sounds very spa-like. We're traffic smoothing.
Yeah, and it also leaves it up to the listeners. Smoothing has this notion of being positive no matter almost how you use it. It kind of leaves it up to the listener's interpretation.
Correct.
This recent ruling that has been made regarding the 3-foot clearance for bicycles. I live in Martinez, and Release Valley Road, and those roads back there are barely 22 feet wide, if they're that wide. Has any thought been given to how that's going to be financed? Or I think there's a ruling about trucks on the mountainous roads. If they have so many cars behind them, they're supposed to pull over and allow people to pass. This seems to me to be a very controversial decision that was made, and it's going to be tough on both the motorists and the bicyclists to get along with it, I think. Any thought been given to that?
Well, I do know that on the telephone town hall last night, somebody did ask a question about the new 3-foot rule, and unfortunately I was on answering some other calls and I didn't get a chance to hear the answer, so I couldn't actually tell you what our executive director said about it. I do think that that's something that's going to become a big consideration in the next year for all of our jurisdictions. It's something that they're going to have to be able to address. And in all honesty, I'm not exactly very familiar with the rule about trucks having to pull over, so I'd have to probably look at that before I could give you an answer.
Thank you.
Actually, to clarify, it's actually a state law, not a rule.
Yeah.
State law.
It's a
Yeah,
state
it is.
law. So, and also, I was reading in the newspaper when they were talking about the implementation that, yes, indeed, that if the you're not, actually, I think I was watching Channel 5 News or something like that, where one of the reporters had like a 3-foot stick or something like that, and yes, it didn't have difficulties, and of course, cars are not, or any vehicle is not allowed to cross a double yellow line, so it does create issues. Yes, indeed, the bicyclists, if they are causing a traffic jam, their requirement is to pull over. So it does, because a bicycle is a vehicle, so it's going to have to adhere to the state vehicle code, and all the laws and regulations that would apply to a car or a truck are going to apply to a bicycle too. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, you speak about the news broadcast. When they were broadcasting that, I shook my head because one of the news broadcasts were showing a bicycle in the car lane.
Yeah.
Riding on the car side of the white line for the bicycle line. I shook my head at that, and they're talking about the 3-foot limit. I said, they should have shown a better picture.
Yeah, and so also, since we seem to be going this way, I just have a real quick question. What was the attendance at these various meetings, Sarah? Can you give any comment on that?
At the public meetings?
Yes.
So total there is about 130 people for 5 meetings, and I would say probably the most well-attended meeting was the one that was hosted in Walnut Creek, the Central County meeting. Probably, and you can correct me, Martin, because I wasn't able to attend the Richmond meeting, but I think probably the one with the sparsest attendance would have been the one held in Pittsburgh. Is that correct? And then the other 3 were kind of all around the same number of folks. And I don't have those exact figures in front of me.
a couple of your projects here in the proposed plan pertain to having bicycle lanes along the 24 corridor. And it includes like following the Caltrans right-of-way and the Ed Bud pipeline and so on like that, to build a bicycle lane, and pedestrian too, I think, which I guess would require an extra line of fencing or something. In your responses, have you heard anybody say anything about having extra bicycle lanes along 24, or have they required more bicycle lanes like around schools, or what type of extra lanes do they want?
I think what we've heard is they just want more bicycle lanes, period. It almost, they haven't put any caveats really on that, but just that as a county we need more bicycle lanes so that there's a safer way for bicyclists to get where they want to go.
Has there been a demand for bicycle lanes along 24? And it would lead up to the tunnel, and would they be able to drive through, take their bikes through the tunnel?
I don't believe we've had any specific requests for being able to bike through the Caldecott Tunnel. I do know that the meeting in Walnut Creek, which was kind of the central county meeting, there were quite a few folks who biked to that meeting and who had expressed a desire for more bike lanes and some concerns about not having continuous bike lanes or not having all of the trails connect and having to cross busy intersections on their bikes. And some of them felt that was not quite safe for them or their families.
We can use the Iron Horse Trail out here as an example of that. It's a good exercise thing, and it's wide enough that there's, of course, I have very limited experience. I live in Richmond, but for exercise before the meetings here when I've had the time. And it seems like the peds and the bicyclists seem to get along fairly well. But it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really connect anything. It peters out into gravel in a parking lot on this end and just stops on the other end. So you're really not tying together nodes of travel.
Yes, that is a comment we've heard in multiple places in the county.
Speaking of the Iron Horse Trail, at the Lafayette workshop I went, which was excellent. I thought the presenter was Mayor something?
Mayor Don Tatson of Lafayette.
He did a nice job. In the big boards, I saw for the first time there was an Iron Horse Trail out near Livermore in the county of Alameda. Did the Southern Pacific go that way, or how did that happen? It's up to you.
Martin's saying yes. I'm sure, looking at Martin, that it's probably very detailed
Sally.
in the action plan.
Yes, Sally, I was at the Iron Horse Trail about 2 months ago in August, because I had a meeting in Pleasanton, and I was able to walk along the trail and thought it was really nice. So I walked along it for about, I think, 4.8 miles or something like that. But yeah, it's really nice.
It's Pleasanton. I knew about Pleasanton. But Livermore?
It comes down south to Pleasanton, and then it heads out east towards Livermore. And that's the train, that's the rail alignment. I don't know the name of the alignment, probably UP.
Also, to take a moment with regard to the 3-foot clearance or 3-foot lanes, from a practical standpoint, certainly not much is going to happen with regard to that. What bicyclists need to be able to do is they need to stay out. If you're talking, we're not talking. I'm talking here about in urban environments. You have to stay out of the door swings, and drivers should give bicyclists a little bit of space on their side. But it's absolutely critical to stay out of the door swings. In fact, the training film for the American Bicycle Association shows the aftermath of a bicyclist getting hit by a bus after he got doored. And I've been in exactly that very same scenario, going to the dentist on Park Avenue in Oakland, when somebody threw open the door of a Camaro, which is really long, as an AC Transit bus was going by, and I was where I was supposed to be when he threw the door open. So, and the thing that's along with education, the other, they always talk about the 3 E's, and there's like the one that's really missing is the enforcement part. That's going to be the real hurdle.
And finally, were there many inquiries or interest regarding the ferry? I haven't heard anything regarding the ferry.
Yes, it's been a hot topic at some of the public workshops, and I believe, I can't remember if it was at this body or recent body, but we have released the ferry feasibility study. It is posted on our website. I believe it's been up since early August. And, the information there is really for the different jurisdictions to decide if ferry service is a good alternative to them and something that they want to pursue. Our job is really just to provide the information on that, and it's up to the different regions to decide if they want to make that a priority in their funding. But it has been a very popular topic, I think, probably because it's one of the items we used in our tagline, do you want BART, buses, ferries? And I think that caught a lot of people's eyes because it's not necessarily something that we typically talk about. And we kind of did that on purpose, to be honest, because we wanted to generate some conversation and catch people's attention and try to encourage them to participate and let us know whether that was something that they were interested in, and we kind of used it to spark a conversation.
Okay, so to make sure I understand you correctly, are you saying that during the phone survey that ferries, the discussion regarding ferries was very positive, and they were responding, were there direct questions, or how did ferries rank as opposed to the other parameters that were used? That's one. And second, during the face-to-face interviews, which should have taken place at a particular workshop or some other off-site, were there any response or inquiries, again, or interest from the public, and if so, where geographically regarding ferries?
So to clarify, the phone survey that I showed at the very beginning happened during February and March, and I don't believe we actually allowed for any sort of discussion or comments during the phone survey. Ferries, a question about ferry service was put in there as a ranking question, and I'd have to go back to clarify that. But during the phone survey that was done in February, March by the polling company, we did not actively solicit any comments. So the discussion about ferry service has really taken place at the public workshops and at the online participation tool. So I would say really since August, has there been a lot of discussion about that. And I would say that, there's quite a few interests. There were multiple cities studied in the ferry feasibility, I believe it was, and I could be wrong, Antioch, Martinez, Hercules, and Richmond. And so in each of those cities, of course, because it's something that's been discussed, folks from those cities are very interested in ferry service, and some of them think it's been a really wide array of comments. Some of them really love the idea. Some of them can't believe we would even mention the idea. You're getting a real cross-section. And I think if you have a moment to look at the comments that are posted online, you can see them without having to log into the tool. You'll see that there's quite an array of opinions on ferry
And are they
service.
both quantitative data and qualitative, or just
I believe
just descriptive?
In the ferry feasibility report, there is quantitative and qualitative data.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just sort of the comment about the bicycles and obeying the rules. I mean, my biggest complaint about bicycles is that they don't. Now, I've seen a lot stopping for stoplights, but I've seen very, very few will stop at a stop sign. They will continue to ride straight through the stop sign. They may look both ways to see if any traffic's coming, but they sure don't stop. And I don't know what the rule is, but I think it should be single file, not double file or triple file up through on major streets. But I'm not sure what that rule is. I don't know.
Technically, the laws are essentially the same. Plus bicyclists are obligated to be mindful of other people and not to interfere with the flow of traffic. Although people driving are obligated to stay behind the bicyclist if there's no room to pass. Now here we're usually talking about a narrow country kind of road. There's no shoulder, so you're obligated to stay behind the bicyclist until you can get to some safe place to pull over. But he's obligated to pull over. And when I mentioned enforcement a moment ago, what I was really thinking of, and I didn't clarify that point, was of the bicyclists. Probably until there's some real getting the police to put the effort into, the best educational tool is probably going to be getting a ticket, get people to do what they're supposed to do. As for things like stop signs and whatnot, the zillion stop signs that have been put up, they've been put up there to slow down cars, not bicyclists, and to keep. But kind of the way in other states, bicyclists are allowed to use stop signs as yields. But again, if you're approaching, whether you quote unquote go through the stop sign, never completely stop, what's the situation? Are we in commute times where you've got pedestrians, where you've got cars stop? If it's 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, like when I go to work, sometimes I won't stop for a stop sign. There's no peds and there's no cars. So I won't blow through it, but I won't stop pedaling. So again, it's sort of conditional. And then coming back to the deal about, so the example of the 3-foot requirement to give safe passage, other states like Oregon, I'd say California's so far behind us, they have laws which obligate drivers to pay attention to vulnerable road users. So you have an affirmative duty to watch out for the safety of pedestrians and bicyclists. In California, it's, oh, I ran over a bicyclist, oh, the sun got in my face. Things happen.
But probably the same rules apply to bicyclists. Well, you see what's happened.
I just got through saying, I think that enforcement, but again, you've had 2 fatalities with crazy bicyclists as opposed to 798 pedestrian fatalities over the last decade. So on the score of things bad to happen, you're way better off getting hit by a bicyclist percentage-wise than by a car.
I also have a public comment request. Mr. Hoffman?
I have another comment.
Just a minute.
Yeah. I noticed that you have made it quite an effort to have outreach to the Hispanic-speaking population. Has that elicited any Hispanic response?
Could you clarify what you mean by that? So yes, we have made an effort to produce our materials in Spanish as well as English, and at all the public workshops we have had a Spanish language interpreter in case any folks want to call. And we also have a few Spanish-speaking folks in our office in case we receive any emails or phone calls that need to be addressed, shared, or interpreted. So you are correct. We are making an effort to accommodate Spanish speakers in this outreach effort.
Go ahead.
Ralph Hoffman from BART proximate downtown Walnut Creek. At the Mercer, we have Mike's Bikes, by the way, and I did attend the town hall telephone access. I was one of the 4,000 last evening. Randy and several others, including Martin, were great at answering questions that could be answered online. Of course, I had questions, but I was called on, so I was one of the 54 people to email in their comments. And I favored bikes. I also commented on raising the Measure J 0.5% tax up to 1%, like LA County has already done. And I also commented on, as far as bicycles, on the 3-foot rule, and also bicycles on sidewalks where they're actually prohibited and where there is a bike lane as well. And that can be a hazard to senior citizens and others who walk there. And I won't go into all my comments, but I may comment some more by email, since I have until the 3rd of November to comment. And I hope we do get a lot more comments coming in, because we need, we need the public to respond to this. But that's about all I have. Thank you.
I have one other question for you. In last night's discussion, there was something, I didn't get the first name of it, about a connection. Someone asked about buses not having to stop if there was nobody at the bus stop, and either Martin or Randy had a response for that, that either there was an app or, can you go over that real quick?
I believe you probably heard something related to connection protection was probably what it was. And I think this is was part of a discussion about new technologies that could potentially be implemented in the future. And the thought is that we spoke briefly earlier about Karma being an app that people can use for ride-sharing purposes. It also has potential to help with dynamic bus routing, so that a bus driver can recognize whether somebody is at the stop, or you can essentially call the bus on demand from a bus stop, and buses can be dynamically routed to pick up only at stops where there are people and drop off only where people want to go, to potentially increase efficiency. I don't know how far along that effort is, but I know there has been a lot of discussion in our office about kind of that first last mile between transit and helping people get to their destinations and back. And a lot of that has been referred to, I've heard the term connection protection quite a bit, in that that's your connection, and we want to make sure that when you get off BART and you're trying to connect to a bus, that's there. And maybe there's a way to help those systems talk to each other, so the bus driver knows that the BART train is running 2 minutes behind, and they adjust their schedule to wait to see if anybody's trying to make that connection. I think that's the sort of technology that's being referred to last evening.
That came up, I think in East County, but I see it when I take BART going into Del Norte, because I live near Del Norte, and I see people miss their bus because the bus is left 3 minutes before because of the delay on BART. Thank you.
I think Ace Train has a function. If they're running late, they're able to communicate with the bus lines and these particular shuttle buses that go to BART station from the Pleasant Hill Ace Train station. They'll wait, and they'll pick up double loads of Ace Train passengers sometimes, and they'll call in extra buses. So it exists in other places. I don't know about the rest of the transit systems.
You can get the transit systems, at least AC Transit and the like, to modify a schedule if there's a particular deal going on with the BART train. I can give you an example of when I lived in Oakland. We had exactly that situation. BART coming in on time, people coming down, the buses pulling out 38 line for AC Transit. So I just made that mention, and they changed the timing of that line so that it coincided with. So it's certainly within the realm of possibility to, since all of the buses have now anyway have GPS, all have radios, all have other electronic gadgets, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to use that already existing infrastructure to send a message, stay for 2 minutes or 3 minutes. The technology is there, stuff's already in place.
Correct.
Well, if we're finished with this subject, we'll move on to reports. I must apologize. I did complete my report yesterday and then totally forgot to send it off to Diane or to bring a copy with me. So I think we'll just combine that with next month's report. rather than me try to remember everything I said. Are there any other member or staff comments?
I just wanted to mention something I found out yesterday, that Tri-Delta Transit was voted one of the best transit systems in the country.
Aren't you going to ask Martin your question?
Nice try, Martin.
I do have a question for you. When Measure C was enacted or voted on and approved, what was the process for organizing and setting up the Contra Costa County Transit Authority? Somebody asked me that, and I said I'd get back to them. I sent an email to Diane. She passed it on to you guys, and
Well, it was all actually pre-established in the ordinance that the voters approved. And the ordinance stated what the composition of the authority would be. The ordinance stated that this committee would exist, though this committee's composition has changed over the years. It talked about standing committees for the authority, the planning committee and the admin committee, and it also included the technical coordinating committee. So all of that, the whole structure was organized through ordinance, I think it was 88 something, back in 1987.
but who administers that?
And then the authority convened and hired an executive director. The authority was convened, the 11 elected officials and 3 ex officios gathered and hired an executive director. Then the executive director began the staffing effort and also transforming that 20-page ordinance into, so many volumes of documents, implementation guidelines, strategic plans, technical procedures, and so forth, so that we could actually implement the program. And all the things like the growth management program, the questions in the growth management program were established in the ordinance and just as statements of what the cities would do. And then that was later transformed into a checklist by staff and the various committees.
Martin, who's the ordinance you specified? Was that a county ordinance? I forget whether.
It was put on the ballot by Contra Costa County.
Okay,
and then there was a committee, the committee that established it.
Sure.
A committee similar to the authority.
So I guess that answers your question, Michael. It was a county the voters voted on a county ordinance,
Right.
which had the framework for the authority.
So I can go back and look at the original measure, and
Oh, yeah.
it should have all of that in it.
Right.
Yeah, it's very, even Measure J has a lot of the legal requirements of the authority and the other committees.
Yeah, we can send you the original ordinance. Why don't we do that? We'll email it to you.
That would be fun. I've read the Federalist Papers, and it took me a long time.
It's very enlightening, I would say, though. They're very enlightening. Now, would you mind sending it to each of us? Okay, thank you.
I'd like to make a comment, if possible. Thank you. I've been absent for the last 2 meetings, and I wanted to thank everyone for your indulgence. I don't know if you know, I went back to school and earned my certificate as a mediator. So it wasn't that I was off and running to Lake Tahoe and having a great time. Actually, I wasn't having a great time at all. And I'm very happy to be back. So when you see that I've been absent for the last 2 meetings, I sincerely apologize if I missed anything that was, everything is critical, but I thank you so much for allowing me to return. For a minute, I thought Diane and or Martin might say, can't come back. But thank you so much.
Well, you might be interested. There might be a mediator opportunity in Moraga
That's a good point.
Yes, Russell, we'll talk.
Good.
Anyone have anything about future agenda items? We have had a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye. Thank you very much.